no.
So I'll begin by saying that I truly believe that God ordained from the beginning that this little boy would be our son. That through the years, he's orchestrated even the smallest of details. And thankfully, he was gracious in feeding us tidbits of this unfolding story all along the way. I believe so that our hope would endure and that our faith would be built up by the amazing way that he's answered all of our prayers. I would guess that most of you have heard something about how Colton came into our lives. But it is our hope today that in sharing our story in its entirety with you, that your faith may also be strengthened, and that the reality of just how faithful our God is to his children would be proclaimed here today. So this is our testimony of his love. Our story began 7 years ago, in 2003. We say, okay, we're ready to start a family now. We've been married for quite a while, and we got everything ready, picked out names. Colton was our boy name that we had picked out years and years ago. And then, after trying to get pregnant for a few months, we get a word from our friend, LaDonna, and she says, it's going to take a lot longer than you think it will. And, of course, we were kind of like, no, don't say that, no! And then...
we're thinking like maybe a year.
And then the next year, 2004, we got another word from a young woman in our congregation named Amanda, and she said to me, he sees you, and he has heard the cry of your heart. It will be in his time, a wonderful and beautiful gift. Do not worry, he will give you the desire of your heart. And by that time, it had been a year. Still, plenty of time. It takes, people a while sometimes to get pregnant. And so we're kind of like, well, how long are we going to wait? Because we said, hey, we're ready now. So we decided that if it didn't happen that we got pregnant within about 5 years, that we would just go ahead and adopt. And we thought, this is our backup plan. But truly, now we see that it was prompting from God. He knew that this was plan A. In 2005, I was at the Vineyard Women's Conference. It was a women's retreat here for the church. I got a word from Lane Fish, who is the pastor's wife from the Vancouver Vineyard, and she said, there are specific things you've been asking God. He says, do not grow weary in your asking. I'm building faith and feeding you my word as you ask. For those who keep on asking, receive. Those who keep knocking, the door will be opened. Those who keep seeking, find.
So I'm letting Steph do all the talking because I'm a sore throat. So it's been a couple years at this point, and the waiting's kind of starting to get to us. And we didn't really even understand that the waiting had really just begun. It's 7 years later. And so, this has only been a couple years. So we talk about it, and we decide just to go ahead and trust God. We've heard his promises, and we're going to just trust him and not seek any medical intervention at that time. We thought maybe we'll do that in the future after we're trusting God or something. I don't know. It's like at this point, we keep hearing the story over and over, and I think Glenn was actually teaching it at church, and we heard it other places, in the story of Sarah and Abraham, and how God had made them a promise, and it was a long, long wait for them. They waited a lot longer than we have. And they took matters into their own hands at one point, and it didn't end really well for them doing that. And we kept being reminded of that, to just trust and just wait, even though it was really hard. And we just were reminded that the promise will be fulfilled. Even if we somehow mess up along the way, the promise will still be fulfilled. So, all around us, people are getting pregnant and having babies, and it was really hard. It's really hard when that's something that's on your heart and it's not happening for you. And it was really emotional, touchy subject, and so we would only bring it up when we were both feeling like crying. So it was difficult. In 2005, a good friend of our church, Bob Hartley, came and spoke to us. And he had words for a lot of people. And the word he had for us was, he said, he sees you, he knows where you live, and he will give you the family that you desire, that it will be in his time. And that we needed that word at that point, because we were starting to sink a little bit in our faith and in our hope.
The next year, 2006, we found out that our very favorite worship leader of all time, Rita Springer, is going to be at a worship conference in Salem. So we dropped everything and we go to this conference. And she speaks on Isaiah 54, focusing on caring for orphans, and she shares the story of her son's adoption from Africa. And also, just at that time, we were getting ready to leave for Mexico, which we felt God was calling us to do, to go serve at an orphanage there. And it really spoke to our hearts that at this worship conference, this woman that we greatly admire is talking about caring for orphans. And we were just really blessed by her testimony of her adoption as well. So then that year, 2006, and through 2007, we find ourselves living at an orphanage in Mexico. Our life verse for that time was James 1:27. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Other verses that spoke to me during our time down there were Romans 4:20. He did not waver at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God. And also Matthew 19:26. With God, all things are possible. It was really, really a difficult year, especially for me, to live amongst all of these kids that have no families. And it was a blessing to me to be able to give some of the mother's heart that God had created in me for these kids. But it was really, really painful too. My first job when I got down there was for an entire month to care for a newborn baby. And that was my job all day long. And I would sit with him while he was sleeping, and I would rock him, and I would just be like, why, God? Why are you making me do this? I don't get it. But during that time too, it's like he was cultivating in me a desire to care for kids that don't have families, and so it was also really good. But also too, we kind of thought, okay, we're doing what you're asking us to do, God. So now, do what you say you're going to do, and let us have our own child. We really expected to be pregnant by the time we left Mexico, but that did not happen.